Dreaming of a bucket list adventure in an exotic location, but scared of catching travel sicknesses or getting injured? What do you actually do if you get sick in a foreign country? In this episode, you'll learn how you can bridge the gap between adventure and medical preparedness so a scrape, insect bite, or common cold doesn't have to derail your bucket list trip entirely. Let's go. In this episode, you will discover the biggest mistake that travelers make when it comes to their health, the most underrated yet essential medications you should add to your travel first aid kit, and how to bridge the gap between spontaneity and preparedness so a sickness or injury doesn't have to derail your entire bucket list trip. Hey there, everyone. My name is Kelly Tolliday. I'm your host and your trusted travel friend. This is actually part 2 of a 2-part series with Dr. Eric Wolk, founder of Jetset Meds. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, be sure to go back to the last episode and give it a listen. Today's episode is dedicated to ensuring that your bucket list trip goes off without a hitch or a cough. As a reminder, the information shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. So as always, consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes. And stay tuned for the end of the episode where I share an exclusive code to receive a discount on your first Jetset Meds kit. All right, let's get into the episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Transform with Travel podcast. I am joined today again by Dr. Eric Wolk. We are here for part 2 of our episode. Dr. Eric Wolk is the founder of Jetset Meds. And last week, in part 1 of this episode, we talked about the scientific link between travel and longevity, health span, your vitality, how every aspect of your health can be enhanced by the world of travel. And Eric has amazing experiences personally as well as professionally of how travel can really be a tool in your health toolkit. So be sure to listen to part 1 of this episode. Just last week, we just published that. And this week, we're actually going to be going into the very practical travel health advice that you can take to be able to prepare yourself. So you're bridging the gap between having this adventure of a lifetime, but also knowing that you are prepared from a medical perspective, focusing on some of the common travel health risks, some, as I said, practical travel health advice, and how Dr. Wolk's company, Jetset Meds, can help you along the way to feel like you have that peace of mind that no matter what comes up along the way, that you are going to be taken care of. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so happy to have you here, Dr. Wolk.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly. I appreciate
And
it.
I'd love to start by talking about this aha moment where you came up with the big idea for Jetset Meds, because you have over 20 years of experience in emergency medicine, as well as now leaning more into concierge care and preventative health. So you have this amazing blend of acute emergency medicine, as well as really looking at health from a 360-degree lens. And we talked a lot about in part 1, your 9 pillars of lifelong health and how travel can play a role in that. But at some point along the way of, being in the world of medicine for 20 plus years, you decided to create Jetset Meds. So I'd love for you to talk about that aha moment and how Jetset Meds helps travelers on their journeys.
Thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. You summarized it very nicely, probably better than I could have. So, taking the knowledge that I gained over the years as an emergency medicine doctor, and then kind of becoming a little bit more intimately involved in my patients' lives as a concierge provider, post-COVID, as you know, everybody was like, get me out of here, right? Like it was like, YOLO, YOLO, and like you only live once, and we're going here, we're going there, we're going here, we're going there. And I found out, which I sort of knew, which is that once one of my patients leaves, the good old US and they go to wherever it is they're going, I can no longer pick up the phone and call CVS and call in a prescription medication for them. And so after this created some aggravating situations for my patients 3, 4, or 5 times, I thought, well, there has to be a better way. And so that better way was, rather than relying on a foreign pharmacy, which I can call prescriptions into to get you the medicines that you may need, how about we just send you with the medicines that I think you might need? And that way, if the situation arises, you sort of have what you need, and then you can text chat me and I can kind of walk you through what you may or may not take for dealing with whatever situation might arise. And so we started doing that for our patients, and we got some amazing feedback. And so specifically one of my patients who is in the world of e-commerce, he's actually kind of like not Jeff Bezos, but close. He turned to me one day and he was like, "Stop practicing medicine. This should be your job." So I haven't stopped practicing medicine, but taking his extremely valuable advice, we decided to go ahead and got a little bit of money together, and that's how Jetset Meds started.
That's awesome. And did you have any like of your own travels? Because you've been all over the world. How did your own travels inspire not just the creation of Jet Set Meds, but what would be included in the kits?
So my wife and I have had she used to travel for work, and actually during residency, the company that she worked for, she trained a sales software, a corporate sales software, and she had 60,000 people to train across 6
Wow.
continents. And her employer at the time said, "Well, either you can fly home, or if you want, you can fly your then boyfriend to come see you," because they didn't care. The ticket was the ticket. So she would stay wherever she was, whether it was Singapore, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, Europe, and I would kind of stack a bunch of my shifts in residency and then head on a plane and meet her wherever she was. And so, travel has always been sort of an intimate part of our lives. And, just like anything else, you get out of your comfort zone a little bit, and the propensity for something to maybe not go as to plan increases a little bit, but that's sort of, I'll say, the fun of it, right? Like that's what risk taking is about. But I always felt like probably we would be doing ourselves a big favor by sort of trying to mitigate that risk a little bit by being prepared. It's sort of part and parcel of my nature, being an ER doctor, that like, no, I leave the house usually with a few. My wife might not even know, but I usually leave the house. We go out to dinner. I have a few tricks up my sleeve just in case. So, somebody needs something. That concept of just there's no harm in being prepared. And I always feel like I love coming through in the clutch. So one of my clients who brings me, thankfully, on a lot of his excursions and his trips, when something as simple as like a Zofran can be such a lifesaver for somebody, right? Like one small little tablet like Zofran can take a 10 out of 10 nausea vomiting situation and just make it tolerable.
Hmm.
Something as simple as like a hydration pack, a liquid IV or something like that can be a real lifesaver. Like, I don't want to admit this, but I was surfing in Nicaragua once and it was so hot. And when you're in the water, you don't feel like you're getting dehydrated. And I 100% pushed myself into heat stroke, which is so embarrassing. My wife was ready to kill me. But, I had like a ton of, liquid IV and hydration packets with me. And like that was an absolute lifesaver. If I didn't have that, I don't know what I would do, because there is no Gatorade in
Hmm.
Nicaragua, right? There is no electrolyte supplement fluid in places like that. So bringing those things with you can be just so clutch, and just like coming through for people in the clutch when they need it most, when they're far from home. There's such a sense of satisfaction from that, right? Like when someone calls me, and even something as simple as like a UTI, like I have a UTI, like untreated, a UTI can become a kidney infection. Untreated, a kidney infection can become sepsis. But if you catch it early and you get the right medications on board early, which is something as simple as like a macrobid antibiotic, which is included in Jetset Meds, you can really take a situation that could turn into something, a travesty, and just cut it off before it gets to that. I did, again, like, like my wife has the famous right foot. She not only did she have a scorpion sting her right foot, but she also had a botfly in her foot. I'm
Oh
sure
my
you know what that
God.
is. Have you ever seen a botfly
Not
in
not in
person?
person, no. Thankfully.
So, so
Wait. For those that are listening that don't know what a botfly is, can you explain like what it does?
yeah, essentially imagine a harmless housefly that looks like a harmless housefly, except the one difference is it lays its larvae into soft tissue. Typically, the soft tissue is that of an animal, like livestock, but occasionally it's that of a human. And that, in one occasion, was my wife's right foot, which was so cool for me, because that I wasn't as worried about with the scorpions thing, because I knew it was not dangerous. But you literally squeeze it, and essentially a maggot comes out of the
Oh my
soft
God.
tissue. And it's easy to treat. I mean, obviously it's a little bit inflamed thereafter, but again, like just for something like that, like a topical, what's called mupirocin or
Hmm.
Bactroban, which is a prescription topical antibiotic ointment, 2 times a day, and you're done, right? Otherwise, if she doesn't have that and she's, in a waiting room somewhere, waiting to be told by, I'm sure, some awesome Costa Rican doctor that it's a botfly, so it's those little things. And then, by the way, we were staring up at the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, and that same foot got stung by a fire ant.
Okay, she needs to wear like a metal boot or something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. But, and like, again, these aren't like, fortunately, it's nothing life threatening, but like, fire ant sting. Oh man,
Yeah.
does that hurt.
Yeah.
That is super, super painful. And the treatment is 600 milligram ibuprofen, which is something we have in the Jetset kit. So the point is, like, it's generally we see patterns of illness, especially associated with travel. And it's the same kind of things that come up over and over again. And so once I gave it some real thought, I think the EpiPen is an add-on to the kit. And EpiPen is something that I really encourage everyone to
Mhm.
have, like even if you don't have allergies. EpiPen is unfortunately secondary to Narcan is probably the number one most life-saving medication in the acute setting that we have. It's extremely time sensitive. And I always tell my patients that if you think you're having allergic reaction and if you think it's affecting anything more than just your skin, always take the dose of the EpiPen. All you have to lose is the cost of the EpiPen. We offer a 2-pack in the Jetset kit. Unfortunately, about 4 or 5 years ago, the company that makes EpiPens up the price of them quite a bit. So it is a very expensive medication. Like if you show up at CVS without insurance for a 2-pack, it's probably 800 to
Mhm.
$1,000. We offer them in our kits as an add-on for $300 for 2 pens. So it's $150
It's
per
really
pen, which I
good.
really keep that price as low as possible because it really is truly, a potentially life-saving medication. And it's all about time to treat. Like it's all about time to treat. You can really stop the physiologic process, just stop it in its tracks if and when you give it early. So I always tell my patients, like if you think anything is happening, especially if there's a history of anaphylaxis, you give it. It's a super, super, super safe medication. Almost, we looked at this. People think, well, if it causes cardiac arrhythmias, it causes blood pressure to go up. It does increase heart rate and it does increase blood pressure, but it has been shown to be wildly safe, even in folks that have had recent heart attack and even in folks that have had recent issues with cardiac arrhythmias. You give it.
Yeah.
So give it, give it, give it. Because seeing someone succumb to anaphylaxis, which I have witnessed it's so terrible, and you just see it and you just know it was
Yeah.
avoidable, and avoidable deaths are always some of the most difficult. So yeah, so EpiPen is something that we felt was really absolutely necessary. One of our co-founders is an allergist immunologist, and it meant a lot to him that we offer that as well. EpiPens are something that really should be in every household, sort of like a smoke alarm, carbon monoxide, that kind of a thing.
Totally.
So,
I actually really appreciate that because so my daughter's allergic to eggs. We have an EpiPen, well, multiple EpiPens for her.
mhm,
But just in
mhm,
Costa Rica last week, I got stung by a bee, and I've been stung by a bee before, so I know I'm not allergic. But my mom was like, is that okay? Like, do you have reactions to it?" And I was like, "No, but like what if I had just never been stung by a bee before and I just didn't know?" And
mhm.
oftentimes people ask me like, what do I pack in my bags when I'm traveling long term with my kids? And I'm like, honestly, half the bag is medicine because while yes, you can go to the urgent care, you can go to the pharmacy, you can go to whatever store, but when you need Tylenol for your kid or when you need a Zofran because you've been over the toilet
Right.
for 12 hours, like you need it and you're not going to want to get in the car and drive down the mountain and see the urgent care. Like, what do you say to the people who just say things like, "Oh, well, if I need it, I'll just figure it out," or "I've been fine before, I don't need it." Like, what do you say to those folks who have
Yeah.
a little bit more of that, like, adventurous spirit and don't really
Yeah.
think they need the preparation?
So that actually that reminded me of another quick story I'll share. So a few years back, we were in El Salvador, and as you probably know, stingrays were more common in the Pacific than most people might think, right? And like we know that when we walk out in the water, especially in warm water, especially in the Pacific, we shuffle our feet. And we shuffle our feet so that if there is a ray, we gently move it out of the way rather than stepping on it, because stepping on it is what causes them to go into self-defense
Mhm.
mode and maybe hit someone with the stinger. So there was quite a few people surfing, and I had put on a snorkel just to see, just to look. It wasn't super clear, but it was clear enough. And there were hundreds of rays on a sandy bottom with 50 or 60 surfers above it. And I'm like, wow, no one's been stung. That's great. We go up after the day, we go up to shower, we come back down to the beach where we were like meeting there was like a van that brings people into town at night, and I see this unfortunate gentleman. He looked like he was about 30 years old, and he's holding his foot. And I see all these locals with matches, with lighters, and it looks as though they're trying to light his foot on fire. So I turned to my wife and I go, "Look, I might not know everything there is to know about acute care medicine, but nowhere in the book does it say like, if this happens, like light the person's foot on fire. But I had an idea as to what was happening there, especially since I had just seen that the whole bottom of the ocean was covered in rays. And this kid was sweating and screaming in pain.
Oh,
So I went over to him and I said, and I said what happened. He basically jumped off the board and he landed right on the back of a ray and it got him in the foot. So the first thing I said to him was, please tell me you're not allergic to bees. He says, I'm deathly allergic to bees. And I said, and here we are, like kind of in, the
oh
middle
my
of nowhere.
God.
And so I had an EpiPen in the room. So I said to my wife, I was like, can you please just go up and get it? Because at that point, right, the pain of the sting was not going to be fun, although we can get into how we handle that. But he did not have anaphylaxis. But if he began to show any signs of anaphylaxis, that EpiPen is the difference between life and death in an otherwise fairly innocuous situation, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about pain, treating the pain, which we didn't have any of that. Like, I don't travel with fentanyl. But what we did do was they had like a single stove. So what we, and this is good to know. So what we did was we boiled a pot of water. I took the boiling water and you do 50-50 boiling water, room temperature water, mix it because you're trying to get to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you put the foot in the water, right? And so that 125 degrees is hot enough to denature the protein of the venom, but not hot enough to burn the foot.
Wow.
And you can imagine that the pain is so great that putting foot in borderline scalding water felt so good to him, right? And 120 is pretty hot. You can't leave your foot in there for too long, but if you leave it in for about 5 to 10 minutes, and by the way, anytime I give medical advice, it's, this is just informal medical advice, but we were able to get his foot in this 120-degree water and the pain was gone in like 3 to 5 minutes. We had the EpiPen. Fortunately, he didn't need it. And I ended up giving him some of the meds I had with me to treat the pain. And needless to say, we were invited to a really nice dinner at his home the following night because he was doing fine at that point. But, he was traveling with a group of guys and they had nothing with them, right? They had no medicines of any kind with them. They had a lot of surf gear, but no meds and things like that. So, I'm sure he was the guy who probably was like, we'll be fine. Right. Not expecting to step on and get stung by a ray. So yeah, heat denatures venom from the ocean in general, right? So marine envenomations are very, very easily treated because the proteins denature quickly with heat. People always say like, if I get stung by a jellyfish, do I pee
Yeah.
on it? You can if you want to, but
If you're into that kind of thing.
yeah, but it probably actually doesn't make that big of a difference. The first thing I would do is look for the heat, is look for some hot water. And if you have a thermometer, the goal is 120 Fahrenheit to 125 Fahrenheit, a few minutes at a time, a few minutes in and out. And it's amazing. I've seen people who were absolutely just in astronomical amounts of pain and they're calm within like 3 to 5 minutes, especially if it's on an extremity, which it often
Yeah,
is.
I also think the traveler who, you've paid for your trip and you've got the flights and you're getting the rental car and like costs are starting to add up. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, here's this kit that could potentially be life-saving. And at the very low end of the spectrum, well, best case scenario, you don't have to use it. Worst case scenario, it could be life-saving. In the middle of it, it's at least salvaged your trip. So you didn't walk away thinking you were sick the whole time, right? So it's a win-win. But for some people, there is a cost aspect to it. And while your kits are like wildly reasonable considering all that you're getting, I also like to remind travelers that a trip to an emergency room overseas is going to cost you way more, especially if you don't have travel insurance, which, spoiler alert, everyone should. But if you don't have travel
Mhm.
insurance and you're having to go to the emergency room because of something that could have just been treated in your room by texting your on-call doctor, which we'll talk about in a minute, why not? Like, and then the one thing that I love that you talk about too is like you have this kit now to bring with you on your other travel. So it's almost like the lifespan of this kit moves along with
Mhm.
each trip if it's within the expiration date of the prescriptions. Can you, let's say you are that person who is out in the water and you step on something, whether it's a sea urchin or a stingray, and you don't quite know what to do, and you have your kit with you and you don't have Dr. Wolk by your side walking you, step by step to
Yeah.
to your path to healing. But if you have a Jetset Meds kit, you also have another tool with you, which is your texting support. Can you explain like why you
Yeah.
brought that on as part of the equation and like how you've seen that help travelers?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my discovery of this process, what I realized is that every country is very possessive of their healthcare system, ours and others. And so, once we leave the borders of the United States, to a certain degree, we are actually no longer entitled to our US healthcare system, right? Because I can't prescribe like we talked about and things like that. But one of the things that we can do is we can text chat with our patients. And so when someone buys one of our kits, they get a patient portal. And it's very important that they sign up for the patient portal because the patient portal is what allows them to communicate with our physicians. And it also allows them to refill their medications. So if you go on a trip, let's say you get foodborne illness, you touch base with one of our docs. The doc says, go ahead and take the Z-Pack to treat the foodborne illness. When you come back, you can just jump on your portal and reorder. You're entitled to 2 refills of each medication if you use them. And then just real quick, I just want to touch on a question that comes up a lot, which is like expiration of medications. Every medication that comes from our pharmacy, it has a born on date, essentially, a BOD, which is a born on date. And technically, every medication expires 1 year after the day that it's shipped. However, the truth is, more likely than not, if these medications are stored in a temperature controlled, humidity controlled, out of direct sunlight, 2 years is not unreasonable. And in most other countries of the world, those same medicines have a 5 year expiration date. And then the studies that have been done that actually looked at this, one of them was done with EpiPens, and they pulled an EpiPen from a glove compartment that was in a car in Southern California for 20 years, right? So it was a 20-year-old EpiPen that was probably stored at 135 degrees at times. It was like 90% efficacious
Wow.
still. There were rumors that at one point, if you took doxycycline or if you took certain antibiotics that were expired, it could cause kidney failure. That is 100% not true. There's no evidence to support any of that. If anything, those medications can be a bit less efficacious, but hardly ever are they like deleterious to your overall health. And so that's why I tell people, again, if getting back to the EpiPen example, even if it's 5 years expired, if it's all you have, you take it.
Mm. Hey, I recently did a poll on my Instagram where I asked you what you're looking for most in your travel experience. And the large majority of you said that you're seeking deeper experiences while you travel. In a world of AI and over tourism, we're seeking to see the world in a new way and in a way that leaves the world a better place while also transforming the way that we see ourselves. There is truly no one doing this better than And Beyond. For over 30 years, And Beyond has been curating unforgettable experiences that allow you to immerse in culture, nature, and adventure, all while keeping it luxury and unique. Nicole Robinson, the CMO of And Beyond, was actually on the podcast on episode 77, sharing how the company is redefining luxury and sustainable travel, one trip at a time. And Beyond has created and curated a collection of lodges, camps, and itineraries in some of the world's wildest places. Bucket list destinations like Africa, Asia, South America, and even Antarctica. Whether it's a private safari in Botswana or finding true peace at their stunning river lodge in Bhutan, they've got you covered. And the best part is you can travel with And Beyond no matter what stage of life or style of travel you're in. Think solo traveling, romantic getaways, family adventures, and multi-generational bonding. They handcraft bucket list experiences in a way that leaves you deeply changed and also leaves the world a better place at the same time. I mean, what more could you want out of your travel experience? Head to ambeyond.com to learn more about their lodges, camps, and itineraries and their current special offers like their anniversary or milestone celebration offer. That's www.ambeyond.com, and make sure you tell them that I sent you over. So we've talked a little bit about things that can happen on the road. The common things that you see as a doctor, things like UTI, stings, burns, like you've mentioned before, like ear infections, those types of things. There's quite a bit that we can prepare for, and having Jetset Meds is definitely number one step for that. Are there any ways that maybe you personally do to help prep yourself from a health perspective beforehand? I know one of your personal mantras is movement is medicine. And I
Yeah.
know that you talk in part one, we talked a lot about movement as the second pillar of lifelong health and how travel opens that up to you even more because you're probably moving more than you are in your day-to-day life if you're working in an office or stuff like that. Can
Mhm.
you expand upon the mantra, your own personal mantra of movement is medicine, how travel lends itself to that? And I guess like that it helps you like prepare for your travels a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So I do try to head into my excursions like in optimal health, right? Like I'm probably not having a drink for the week leading up. I oftentimes try to actually shed a little bit of weight. Part of that is because I want to be able to float nicely on a surfboard, but I do try to I try to head into a trip with optimal health and I try to maintain that during my time away, right? Like I don't look at vacation as a time to like go nuts, oh, I'm gonna have a third margarita because here we are in wherever, right? I don't think that that's a good way of looking at it. In fact, I think it's really just the opposite. I think it's a great opportunity from a diet perspective to like certainly try foods we maybe wouldn't have necessarily tried. But if you want to really get the most out of your experience with your travels, you got to make sure you're sleeping well, you're eating well, and then bringing movement into the picture. I think of movement in three different ways, right? There's movement in the sense of like yoga, right? Where we're physically moving our body parts. And then there's like point A to point B moving, which is like taking a walk down the block or taking a walk around the block. And then there's moving in the sense of like traveling from here to another point on the globe. And I think all three of those individually offer wonderfully unique and health benefits and sort of, I'm sure you know that like Lululemon t-shirts on the inside say movement is medicine. And I mostly wear them. And so I love the fact that every morning on the inside of the shirt, I get to read the words movement is medicine. I think it's important to say it, to see it, and to read it just as that daily reminder, because it is so important. Unfortunately, so much of us, like you had mentioned, are sort of glued to a desk sometimes. I do, by the way, as an aside, I do love having my patients purchase desk
Treadmills. Yeah, yeah,
treadmills
yeah.
where they can be like absolutely life changing because unfortunately, like, in the modern world, some of us do need to be at a desktop or at a laptop for hours at a time. But the radiologists were the first ones that I know of to really incorporate treadmills into their screen time. And it's a life changing experience. So I like to look at extreme examples of movement or lack thereof and how those extreme examples affect someone's health. And, unfortunately, in the negatively extreme example is someone who's bedbound, right? And when I'm dealing with bedbound patients, it's a matter of time before something goes very wrong, right? Like our bodies are really designed to move. And one of the other sort of tricks that I used to do when I was taking care of sicker patients and sicker folks in the emergency room is they'd be laying on a bed and I would have to listen to their lungs. And a lot of times I would say, sit up so I can listen to your lung. The ease with which this might sound to you and I might sound a little ridiculous, but the ease with which a person can go from laying to sitting, which is the equivalent of doing, let's say, like a half of a sit up, I can make so much determination about their overall health with whether or not one person has to help, two people have to help. They can do it on their own. I'll never forget, I had this 92-year-old lady once who came in, and I think everyone thought she was a little bit sicker than she was. And I said to her, can you sit up? And she sat up so fast. I mean, it was her core was stronger than mine. Then she laid back down and I said, can you lift up? I was testing her neurologic. I said, can you lift up one leg? She lifted up both legs at the same time, basically did like a leg lift. Then she started just doing leg lifts. And I literally turned to her, I go, what are you doing here? Like, go home. Why are you here in the
Oh
emergency
my
room?
gosh.
So just like from a diagnostic standpoint, like having that movement inside of you, it speaks to so many ends about your overall wellness. I mean, obviously musculoskeletal, but the musculoskeletal then carries over to so many other things. And then when we start talking about movement from point A to point B in the world, right? Like that's another element of how we move ourselves through the world. That's when it starts opening up more of the predictive processing and some of the neurocognitive benefits that we talked about earlier. So I really, I love the idea of plain yoga. When we're in the airport, I'm like embarrassing my family. I'm like stretching and doing. I'm one of those guys that's like doing doing yoga and stretching in the airport before a flight, because for the most part, when you're on the plane, you're not moving a whole lot. So yeah, I mean, movement is so key on so many levels, from a musculoskeletal standpoint, from a neurocognitive standpoint, and then obviously from a cardiac standpoint. Oftentimes the way I interpret things is I break everything down to an organ system. And when you look at the human organ system and how it's negatively or positively affected by something, these three types of movement come into place with such importance.
Yeah, I love how this mantra of movement is medicine can be pre travel, during travel, and post travel. Like preparing your body, like you said, wanting to be in optimal health ahead of time, making sure you're moving every day while you're traveling. I mean, I think all of us listening can relate to just walking around the city and then being like, whoa, this is the most steps I've taken in an entire week.
Oh
I
my,
just did this in two
yeah,
hours. My sister's husband just said we did a hike to the waterfall in Costa Rica, and he was like, I got more steps in the last 4 hours than I have in a week a week at home.
yeah,
And then post travel, I think, is an important piece, is this integration of, wow, I felt really good moving every day. I'm going to set a timer for every 30 minutes while I'm at my desk because I have to, because that's my job. But you can still get up
mhm.
and move around, and allowing the travel piece to really play a role in your health at every step of the way. Are there any other prep that you do apart from getting your body prepared for even long haul travel? Like I know you mentioned not drinking as much, or, drinking a lot of water ahead of time, hydrating.
Mhm.
Is there anything that
Mhm.
you would recommend to travelers who are about to embark on a long term or a short term journey to prepare themselves so that their immune system's the best that they could possibly be?
We could obviously go into a little bit about the world of travel vaccines, which is it's interesting how much that has even changed in the last 5 to 10, 20 years. The amount of vaccines that are now necessary are nothing compared to what they were 20, 25 years ago. I think a lot of that actually is due to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation having had eradicated certain diseases in certain parts of the world. But obviously, checking with the CDC and WHO is always a very wise thing to do, to see if where you're going is a place that requires certain kinds of vaccines. Unfortunately, I will tell you that I'm sure you've experienced this, but yellow fever vaccine has been tough to get.
Mm.
So that's a bit of an issue for travelers. If you're going someplace that has malaria, I think that's a case by case decision. We do offer Malarone, which is the malaria prophylaxis medication.
Inside,
And
right? Yeah.
yeah, it's an addition with the kit. So it's pretty easy to go on the CDC's website and say, I'm going to blank. Do I need to prophylax for malaria? And, the medication is actually very well tolerated. It doesn't have a whole lot of side effects. And the truth is, if someone starts it, this is what I tell my patients: if you start the medication and you have side effects, then you stop it and you do everything else that's necessary to avoid mosquito bites, right? Like mosquitoes are mosquitoes are the source of so many issues for so many people. So I'm, again, like, my partner and I went to Tanzania. We were in Grumeti, which is like the north of Tanzania. Truthfully, I don't think I saw a single bug the entire time, but we were lucky in that regard. But I mean, I was almost to the point where I was going to put duct tape around my I mean, really, like, around my
Yeah.
ankles to my shoes, almost to that point. Because you know why? Who cares? You know what I mean? Like, so someone's going to make fun of me and they're going to laugh at me, but like, I didn't want to get bit by a mosquito, right? So we can do, educating ourselves on like what I think travel advisors are an awesome resource for this as well. But there's nothing wrong with educate. We did talk a lot about the element of surprise and decision making, but that doesn't mean that you should enter a situation without educating yourself beforehand and understanding what the local risks may or may not be. I think, there's something to be said for educating yourself of the local risks, which then allows you to feel more confident in the decisions that you make once you get somewhere. So yeah, I mean, physically, my supplement routine, my medication regimen, I don't really change any of those things prior to travel, but I do really try to do all of, like, going back to like the 9 pillars. I try to really make sure I'm checking all of those boxes heading into a trip. And then some of the little tricks of the trade is, if you're changing time zones, there's a couple of apps that will change the time zone on your phone for you before you leave. And I get some great, especially if people are going to Australia from where we are.
Yeah.
I've gotten some good feedback about people going to Southeast Asia and Australia, where the app basically fools you into thinking you're into that time zone the day before you leave. You just have to make sure you don't have any really important appointments that you're going to miss if you change the time. But it prepares you for the next time zone, and then it puts your meals into the next time zone. And so that's a nice little trick of the
Yeah.
trade.
Wow. I mean, I know obviously a lot about
Yeah.
time zone changes having lived in Australia and Southeast Asia, but to think about like the preparation for that, I've been kind of the type of person where I'm just like, well, I'll just deal with it when I deal with it. But then it does wreak havoc on your sleep, on your digestion, on all of that. So I think that's a really important piece so that you feel your best while you're on your vacation. And I really appreciated the point around just being as educated as you can of the risks of the health risks that are there, with malaria, even with dengue. And there's a it's not to scare anyone. Like definitely this part two of this episode is definitely not to scare people into being like, whoa, there's a lot out there that I didn't realize could be a problem. It's more like the more education you have, the more you know what to look out for should a symptom
Yeah.
arise. And to have people in your corner like yourself and Jetset Meds and other providers is so that you do have somebody to turn to should you be unsure if something were to come
Yeah.
up. And apart from the medications that are in your kit, and I know that's things like Zofran for, nausea, and things like you have the anti-malarial, which is the add-on, the EpiPen, which is the add-on. Is there any other like underrated but just essential items, not even medications, but just items that travelers should have in their own personal first aid kit?
Yeah. You mean aside from what's in Jet Set
Hmm.
Meds?
Of course,
Yeah.
because they're
Good
going to get
question.
that from you.
Yeah. Yeah. So interestingly, I think if someone, so no one's ever asked me that exact question, but I'll tell you exactly what it would be. We are unable to get Sudafed or cetirizine pseudoephedrine in the kit because even though it's not a controlled substance and even though it's not even a prescription, it requires special handling. So if you go to your local pharmacy and you try to buy cetirizine pseudoephedrine, it's not over the counter, but it's also not prescription. It falls into that in between world. And you have to get the card, and then you bring the card to the pharmacist. And the
Mm,
reason for this is because people were making meth from Sudafed. So they're trying to
right.
control the amount of Sudafed that can be purchased by a single person, which is wild that things came to that in our world, but nonetheless. Cetirizine Sudafed 5/120, 10 milligram of cetirizine, which is generic Zyrtec, with 120 milligram Sudafed. I fought so hard to try to get that into the kit, but the pharmacy compliance department would not hear of it. That's probably one of the things that I would say, make sure you have that as well, because it's really going to be your best bet for just postnasal drip, sinus congestion, nasal congestion, that, viral upper respiratory tract. That's kind of my go-to. And most people walk through the aisle in CVS and they see that card and they don't, it's not that big of an ask, but they sort of don't know what to do. They don't know if it's, do I need a prescription? Do I not? It's
Mm,
never really been explained very well to the public for that matter. And so that's probably the one thing I would say, to make sure you have. We do include extra strength acetaminophen, which is Tylenol. And then we do include 600 milligram ibuprofen. And acetaminophen and ibuprofen are such low hanging fruits for so many things that those are the two things that we see getting refilled. Believe it or not, those are the two things that we see getting refilled the most often.
mm. Okay.
Yeah.
So go get the card from the pharmacy. Now that we know what
Yeah.
to do, I love that. And yeah,
Yeah.
I always, because I mean, I travel with my young kids and it's something so simple, but I also always, and it might seem super simple to you as a doctor, and I'm definitely someone who's worked in emergency medicine, but something as simple as Band-Aids. Like, I don't know how many times I've walked through the airport, like I've packed the Band-Aids, but I didn't bring it on my flight with me. And one of my daughters falls and they're screaming for a Band-Aid. And I'm like, oh my God, like I just need to have this little thing with me at all times. Sometimes it's the most simple things that you need. Summertime and the living's easy, especially when you have Best Day Brewing packed in your cooler. Just because you're not drinking alcohol doesn't mean you have to miss out on creating core memories this summer. Beach time, boat days, dips in the lake, and so much more. That's where Best Day Brewing comes in. Brewed in Northern California and crafted for the doers, the trailblazers, the summertime warriors, the adventurers. Yes, that's you. Best Day creates the perfect non-alcoholic beer for life's special moments. And better yet, you can earn $2 back via PayPal or Venmo when you purchase one pack of Best Day Brewing at participating retailers from now until July 30th. Check the link in the show notes for more info on the program. Cheers to your best summer yet. I've really appreciated you sharing some of these more practical health advice and things that can happen along the road. I would love to hear from you. We spoke about this in part one a bit about
Mhm.
the health span and longevity and how travel plays a role in it. But where do you see the role in travel playing in the future of wellness or even in the future of like medical advice?
Yeah. I think what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years is I think more and more people are going to start to recognize the themes and the concepts that we've been speaking of. And it's going to become, I think there's going to be hunger, frankly, for it, right? Like, I think people are going to get tired of allowing machines to make decisions for them. And I think the escape from that will be found in travel. So I think it's going to be a little bit more of the same, even though I don't really know if we've really tapped the surface yet. In other words, I think people subconsciously think of their opportunity to get away as just that, right? Like an opportunity to quote unquote get away. But I think as we move forward into the world of AI and machines making decisions for us, et cetera, I think that desire and need and the health benefits are going to become really more to the forefront. And I think these concepts of predictive processing and active and passive exploring are going to really become like almost everyday terms. Actually, I think people are going to become more cognizant of them, and you're going to see more and more. I don't know if doctors are going to write prescriptions for travel per se, but I really think it's going to become so much more of an important element of our physical, emotional, and psychological well-being. And I think things like the Harvard study of adult development, maybe they're going to start asking more questions about like, how often do you travel? Where do you go? And then we're going to see the folks that find the time and carve out those times in their lives where they are going and exploring and being adventurous. We're going to really start to see the health benefit because it's going to become skewed, because it's going to become so much more important as technology sort of drives our brains in the opposite direction. So I think that's sort of what the future of travel and health and the intersection thereof looks like. So
Mm.
it'll be more important, or as important and more important than ever, frankly.
I love that. I'm 100% on board with all of that. Well, Dr. Wolk, thank you so much for being on the podcast for not just one episode, but for 2 episodes. We've been hanging
Yeah.
out all day together. I love it. We end these episodes with 3 rapid fire questions, and I'm going to change them just a little bit to kind of fit into this health focus that we've been working on. Are you ready? I haven't shared these ahead of time, so see
Yeah.
what comes up for you. Okay. If you could pick one destination, either that you've been to or that you're hoping to go to, that would really encapsulate the perfect Jetset Meds approved health focused getaway, what would that destination look like for you? Or what is that?
I loved going to Tanzania. I absolutely loved going to Africa. There was something just so magical about it. I mean, you really feel like you're in touch with your ancestral self there. And, it incorporated so many of the things that we talked about. A lot of people spend a lot of time on safari sitting in the back of the car, which is not movement. But as I found out, if you're willing to, you can actually do a 35-mile bicycle safari through the Serengeti, which we did, which was amazing. It's a little scary. They do have a truck in front of you with guns and a truck behind you with guns to make sure none of the predators decide to come across the line there as you're riding the bike. But we did a 30-mile bike through the Serengeti, and that was like, to me, that was like encapsulated so much of what we've been talking about. So that would be my the bike ride through the Serengeti was amazing. That would be
Wow.
my
Yeah,
answer. Yeah.
movement, nature, I mean, everything.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So, the next question is typically what's your must-have like travel item? And I'm going to change this slightly to what is your must-have medical item, health item to have with you when you're traveling?
Well, it's super easy. It's definitely Zofran.
Yep.
Zofran is just there's Zofran, which is an anti-nausea medication. It's quite safe. The side effect profile is quite low. I mean, like tens of thousands of doses of Zofran I've given in my career, and that's not an exaggeration. I don't know if I've had more than maybe 1 or 2 deleterious effects, and I usually in the emergency room only gave it intravenously. And it comes as like a nice, easy to take dissolvable sublingual tablet. Even kids can take it down to 6 months. And again, when I give medical advice, on a podcast forum. It's medical advice that I'm giving in this forum, not necessarily always check with your doctor. But I mean, Zofran is excellent for motion sickness. It's for nausea associated with flying. I mean, Zofran, if I could only have one, it would probably be Zofran. Not necessarily because it's a lifesaver per se, but just because it comes up so often.
Yeah, it's like it's a more common use. Like you can use it for, yeah, and it's one of those things, like I said, it's kind of that middle of the ground. Like it could be something where you're like, yeah, I was just sick that whole vacation and it was a wash. Whereas you could just have the Zofran and maybe it doesn't take it away entirely, but you're still able to enjoy your time. And that's one of the medications that's within the kit.
Correct. Yeah. And it also has some mild anti-anxiety properties. So sometimes it even kind of gets people through if they're a little nervous about like one of the connecting flights, in the islands, or it's excellent for all the above.
Right.
So yeah.
And then the
Mhm.
last question is, if you could just give travelers one piece of advice to stay healthy and thriving on the road, what would it be?
That's a good one. I think I'm gonna go with to stay hydrated, right? Because for the most part of what gets people into problems is that they are going from an environment with which they are comfortable in, right? Even if it's a cold, like, if you're coming from the Northeast, our bodies love homeostasis. And the best way to throw off that homeostasis is to take our bodies and put it into an environment that's different from what it's used to. And there's a lot of benefits to that. But generally speaking, that, acclimatizing usually means we're going someplace hot and someplace our bodies aren't used to. And we have what's called insensible fluid loss. Insensible fluid loss is, as opposed to urinating when you can see fluid coming out of your body, when we go into hot environments, we're having fluid loss that we can't see. You can't see it. It's not palpable, but it can be profound, right? Like if you're sleeping in a hotter environment, or we lose moisture to the environment through our skin, through our mouth, through our mucous membranes. And so most people need to take in an extra 32 to 64 ounces of fluid when they're going from one environment to another to make sure they're kind of staying on top of things. And so that would probably be the one thing I would say.
Yeah, and so easy. Just get your reusable water bottle, fill it up. And flying too. Flying's super dehydrating. I mean, I remember it's like
Yeah.
always number one. Stay hydrated.
Altitude, flying, the heat, the surfing, it's like all those things.
Yes.
Just, hydrated knocks all those things off the list.
Absolutely. So, where can
Yeah.
listeners find Jetset Meds and just connect with you for more travel health wisdom, more travel health support? What's the best way for people to say hi?
So www.jetsetmeds.com. And then on Instagram, it's Jetset Meds.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I've really appreciated our time together. And I know this is going to be one of those episodes that people come back to again and again.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
That's the end of today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and being up for the adventure. And huge thanks to Dr. Wolk of Jetset Meds for spending so much time with us across 2 jam-packed episodes. If you're keen on being prepared for your next trip with a Jetset Meds kit, I highly recommend ordering one and use the code TRANSFORM10 to get 10% off your order. And of course, if you're ready for your next bucket list adventure, reach out to me directly to get started. No overwhelm, no midnight TripAdvisor scrolling, no hassle. I remove the stress of planning so you can lean into the feeling of excitement. You can email me at kelly@transformwithtravel.co, and I'm looking forward to helping you bring this to life. See you on the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Transform with Travel podcast. If you have a friend or a loved one you were thinking of during this episode, spread a little love and share this episode with them, someone who could use a little inspiration. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to the podcast as well. To learn more about us, head to www.transformwithtravel.co, and I'll see you on the next episode. This is your reminder to keep on exploring.